Please welcome Ray Robinson. Thank you.
O infinite spirit of wisdom, love, permeating this entire universe with greatness and measure beyond the grasp of finite minds, gather here this day in this church, this sanctuary, this place of refuge, where we, thy instruments of thy peace, gather to understand the greater mind that you are, to feel the presence that you are within our hearts, minds and souls, to give an expression of that love, that strength and that vitality, so we may become instruments of thy peace upon this earth and this world, that we may gather together with insight of mind, of the blessing of the Spirit, and with the love that God affords this world. So let us unite with one accord. Love, peace, and unity, and the message of continuing life. Amen.
It's lovely to be back here. Last year, if any of you, are there many of you that came and saw us last year? If we're going to little show of hands. So a few of you. I'd only just had major surgery, so it was about 4 weeks since I'd had my bowel removed. So I was a little bit on the frail side, but still managed to do a meditation. I'm going to not do a meditation during the service today, because I'm going to do a colour meditation in a colour workshop that I'm doing later this afternoon. And I thought, well, you don't want two meditations within an hour or two of one another. I'll be sending you to sleep otherwise. But what I did want to share with you, this is my 40th year in spiritualism. I met my husband when I was 15. He was already at the Wimbledon Spiritualist Church. And as I say, I first went there in 1977. Sat in my first development circle in 1977. And we're joint presidents and ministers of our church in Wimbledon and our church in Hackbridge. But it's lovely to work as a medium later this afternoon. And I love inspirational speaking and motivating people. And what I wanted to do in just a short reading was to motivate you, hopefully. Now, I just wanted to share a brief part of the story of Hydesville, also known as with the Fox Sisters. Can I have a show of hands if you all know, hopefully? Do you all know about Hydesville and the Fox Sisters? Okay, only one hand. Because next March, it's actually the 170th anniversary. So on the 31st of March, that is a special day, because that's regarded as the birth of modern spiritualism. That's when, for the first time, spiritualists began to set up churches and centres, and mediumship sprung up. And this all happened in a very simple way. It was a phenomenon at the time. It was in the papers, and it spread like wildfire across America, across the continent, and mediums went and visited England, and mediumship grew in England. And from these mediums that had come from America to England, they started churches and centres there. So we looked to that particular day. Now, what actually happened? There's a tiny little village, and I will just read here from my notes. So I just turn the page. And I'll read actually from the Spiritualist Manual as they're talking about it. I only want to use a few lines, so I've got their names correct. The scene is laid at Hydesville, Wayne County, New York, a small frame cottage where live Mr. John Fox, his wife Margaret, and two young daughters, Margaretta, aged 15, and Kate, aged 11. Now, this house had such fantastic manifestations. There were so many noises that the two girls began to think of it as a game. And they decided if they clapped, and they clapped 3 times, they could understand that they were getting 3 taps back from the wall, from the whole essence of the house. So they started to develop it more, and with these knocks, it literally became the, one knock for yes, two knocks for no. And they'd set up a system of communication to the point where it became such a fantastic operation that a gentleman who'd been a peddler had communicated that he'd been murdered in that house and his body was in the floorboards. And he gave such information as to who had actually murdered him, and that his money had been stolen, and that he wanted to convey that he was residing in the spirit world, what we call heaven. And these girls became famous overnight. People were literally lining up outside this tiny cottage because not only did the peddler come through, and his name, as I say, I've got here just a bit, it was Charles B. Rosner, that he could bring other people forward, and they could also do the knocking and the tapping and the raps and things. And it wasn't until 1904, when part of a wall fell down, that they actually revealed the body, the bones of the peddler. Now, these girls developed mediumship. They toured different places in America, and as I say, that was really the time of the real birth of spiritualism. Prior to that, people were a little bit frightened of anyone psychic, anyone that had healing ability, because we'd had persecution where, if you were a little bit gifted and psychic, I mean, we're all psychic, but if you develop it, then you were burnt as witches, not long before that. So really, it was people beginning to look at this evidence in a completely different way and forming it into particular societies, groups, centres, psychological, different research, psychology. All the different teachers and lecturers were all involved during this time, the halfway through the century, from the 1850s through. And, that's what we need to think of. So next year, let's say 31st of March, think of that as a very important day for the birth of modern spiritualism, when you start to look at actually the first communication. Now, as spiritualists, communication is very important, but it's not the be-all and end-all, because what we have had from teachings, from the many inspired people that have gone before us, is about living our life spiritually, about not just having spiritual thoughts, for an hour on a Sunday, and then the rest of the week you go back to living a material time, and that you don't open your feelings. So therefore, I like to try to inspire you to actually go forward. And if people say to you in the street, what's a spiritualist then? What do you believe? Now, my husband's going through an address on the autonomy of spiritualism shortly. But I just made some very simple words for people to say, and I want to just share two of them, because it's very difficult to suddenly say all the aims and objectives and everything of a spiritualist. If you meet someone and they say, what's it all about? So one word I want you to remember is the word peace. Now, I know I shared this very quickly with people last night, because we like to live in peace and harmony. But if you think of those 5 letters of the word peace, P, personal responsibility. And as spiritualists, it's about our own personal responsibility, and it's about how we have our personal development as well. So that's very important. The E is about the fact that we're eternal beings, that we need to embrace ourselves as eternal beings and understand that being on earth is the time for us to have certain experiences that we come down in a physical body for, but that we are eternal. Therefore, death doesn't end us. We don't just become that pile of physical ashes. The real us, the essence of us, continues on that eternal journey. Now, the A, probably guessed, is the angels and the angel realm, and the fact that angels look after us. The C is for communication, for not only just our loved ones in heaven that we're able to speak to through mediumship, but communicating with others as well and understanding others. And then the E, the final letter, to me is about equality, because if you're a spiritualist and you're on a spiritual pathway, then you do treat people with equality and diversity, and you allow people to have their own pathway. Therefore, you don't condemn someone. You don't say you shouldn't have that religion or this religion, you should follow this or you won't get into heaven. because we're all going to get into heaven, because there is no set religion in heaven. So therefore, it doesn't matter what somebody might say to you, oh, well, I'll pray for you, you shouldn't be on that path. Because we say, well, thank you, friend. You follow your path, I'll follow mine. And to finish, the other word that I just wanted to share with you is harmony. Because to me, it's the other different parts of being a spiritist mean to me. And the H in harmony is the healing energies to relieve pain and suffering, and those that are grieving, and for those healers to do their work, their counselling. The A is for afterlife, the fact that we are moving on to that afterlife. The R is for readings, the one-to-ones that we're able to have, and also the readings that we get of wisdom. It's about, renewing ourselves and our knowledge. The M is for meditation and for mediumship. Both are very important, and if we can meditate every day, we can reconnect with ourselves. We're reconnecting with ourselves as spirit. And the O is oneness with self and spirit. The N is nurturing Mother Earth, looking after Mother Earth, nurturing our families, nurturing our soul and our spirit, our knowledge. So nurture is very important. And the Y in harmony, to finish with, is that yearning to grow and develop yourself. Because when you start on that spiritual pathway, you don't want to go back to not being spiritual being, because you're opening up to new feelings, new senses, understanding that you can have an awareness of the energy that builds up in this room, that builds up when healing is taking place, when meditation is taking place. And it's that yearning to keep going and keep that development. So I just wanted to share those few words with you. So I want you to all live in peace and harmony. And just remember that peace is the nice short one, which I just think is very easy then to remember it. You don't need to have it on a card then, because it's so easy, I think, to remember, to sort of say as a spiritual being, this is what I'm working and living to achieve, is peace. Thank you for listening. I hope so.
Well, friends, part of my journey in spiritualism began at the early age of 6. My grandfather on my mum's side passed to the spirit, and for weeks on end, I chatted with him. Come into my bedroom, sit on the edge of my bed, and I'd get up and we'd talk. And I'd then get very upset because I'd try and hug him, and he would go, and he would say to me, I can't hug you, Ray. And I'd go downstairs, run down to my mum and my nan, and say, I've just spoken to Dada, that's how I addressed him. And they went, of course you have, love, don't worry. And I discovered then, through my dreams, I was dreaming of heaven, spiritual realms, seeing spirit guides, spirit teachers, and I was just comfortable in my own little world. Mum and Dad not so comfortable, because they're thinking I'm going a little bit simple. But the power and the manifestation continued in my life so much. From the age of 4 or 5, I told everybody I was going to be a priest. I was taking up the church, and my next door neighbour brought me a little Bible, and I used to go out everywhere to school and tell everyone, I'm going to be a priest. And people say, okay. But the biggest problem I had with that, which we didn't know at the time, I was dyslexic. So I could not really read or write properly. But this Bible had wonderful pictures, like your stained glass windows here, which I could tell a story from. And I would amaze my RE lessons where I could tell these wonderful stories. Round about 11, I had a couple of dreams which I spoke to my dad about. I had a great dad. He was a great man, full of secrets, but a great man. And I had this problem with some homework to do with physics and electrics, and he introduced me to his friend Bill, who was a medium. And Bill sat there and chatted to me, and his eyes read me. They understood me. They helped me come to truth that I know who I am. And I then started sitting in development circle. Now, I would not advocate anyone who has got a child at 11 to rush them to development classes and circles. I'm not saying I was a unique, special little child. My mum's always said I'm special, but that's, I think, another meaning. But the seriousness of it, it was great for me. And at 11, I am giving messages from people that are passed on. And part of that great essence of spiritualism began in my heart and my soul to tell the world. I've never hid the fact that I'm a spiritualist, especially since being ordained. Prior to that, I've got a certificate for mediumship and healership. I've never hid that, and I've worked for the British government in what we call the civil service. And I told everyone, because I've never hidden the fact. And it'd be quite interesting on a Monday morning, some of my colleagues would walk past my desk. How are you? Ray, you lovely? Oh, yes. Did you get any messages for me over the weekend? No. Oh, yes, I did. Give me a raise. I'm feeling that very strongly up here. But I got my office, about 30, 40 people come to a church function, which we call a psychic supper, which basically you have a meal and you get a reading. And they all came, and a lot of them, I can't say conversion happened, but the message got through of continuing life after death. Now, I became a member of the Wimbledon Spiritualist Church as a junior member at around about 11 and a half. But I'd been attending that church on and off on a Sunday morning. And on one occasion, one of the former presidents of the church pointed to me across the hall and said to Bill, "Mr. Mari, why have you got a youngster here? It's against all the rules of spirit. Get him out." So I sat there and I'm looking around thinking, who's he talking about? Oh, me. And Bill said, "Well, I think that's a bit harsh." He said, no, get him out, get him out. Went out the doors like you've got there, and he suddenly came back in. He said, "Mr. Mari, I've just been told by my guide, encourage him, teach him, show him the way of spirit, because he will be doing my job here." And he was president for 25 years of the church during a very strange time of the church, where the church had been bombed in World War II and smashed and built, and he kept the church alive and kept the message going. And he very passionately believed in the teaching of Timothy, where he says, keep the message in season when it goes out of season. When it's out of season, bring it back into the season. Keep that message alive. Keep it with passion and strength, and give it vitality. And as years went on, I developed my mediumship. And it would be strange at times where things would happen, because I was a great believer in what I call discipline with my mediumship. And you go out, get invited out to things. And I went out to a friend's house, and she introduced her brother to me, and he said, "You're a fake. There's no dead people." So I said, "Fine, I can live with that." All night he kept going on about me. And he said, "If you're such a good person at this, tell me something nobody else knows in this room." I said, "In the back, in the trunk of your car, you've got some stolen this, that and the other. This, that and the other. Oh, and you got this, this and this." The blood drained from his face. And he went to his sister, "Help! Is he the Rozzers?" which is another word for police in England. And they said, "No." He said, "But he's just told that he knows everything. Is he an undercover cop? Is there a sting operation going on here?" And I just went, "I don't know where I got that from." And he apologised, and he sat there and got himself very drunk and wasn't able to drive the car home. And my messages and mediumship has worked like that in times when I least expect it. And I've always had the belief with my mediumship that every time I've done a sit-in, and I haven't done sit-ins, one-to-ones, as we call them now in the UK, for a long, long time. Did some mediumship here the other night, which I told Debbie, who was part of the Psychics in the City, "I am awfully sorry, but I don't do mediumship anymore." And I think I was one of the first people to speak up here the other night. So when the power and the manifestation of the Spirit wants you to speak, you speak. The reason I don't do much mediumship now, I run the churches. I'm the administrator. And we also have a promotional arm of the church where we hire a holiday village, and we have it from Friday, Saturday, Sunday to Monday morning, where we do spiritual things all weekend, different classes, different teachings. So I've been trying to do that as well in my daily life. I retired from work just over 3 years ago, coming up to 3 years. And, 2 years, but I retired to look after my dad. And I retired in the September and he passed away in the November. And people were shocked that I wasn't all broken up and destroyed by his passing. And the only part of his passing I didn't like, he didn't get the care I would have liked him to have. But in hindsight, my dad, who was a wonderful, wonderful spiritualist, had a terrible fear of dying. And he became unconscious and he passed to the spirit. So I think God moves in mysterious ways. And I have tried throughout my life to keep my message of spiritualism firm, but foremost simple. I've been used at my place of employment as a counsellor, where they would say to me, a member of staff is really in a bad place, could you talk to them? And they give me time to be able to go and talk to them and help them, until the work counsellor became. And I would talk to people and people would come up to me and say, I've just lost my mum, my dad, my brother, my sister, whatever. Can you tell me? Can you tell me there is a life after death? And I've tried to do that. But the thing is with spiritualism, and I'm guessing it's the same in here in the States, but in England, we're governed by laws. Now, if I said to you, do these numbers, blah, 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 do it on the lottery, you're going to win, and you don't win, you can sue me. So we're not meant to prophesise, as it were. But so we have to word it in such a way where we still give the message, but without prophesying and breaking any laws. And that was because a senior police officer had a reading with a medium, and she told him on Monday he was definitely going to get the promotion he's been waiting for, and he actually got demoted. And he sued the medium, and he got £2,000, and the medium was fined, I think, about £5,000 or £6,000 or prison. So you have to be careful with your message. You have to have, as Jackie just said, that personal responsibility. Now, my church had a sign that we found, which was still got it hanging up in church, but it was partly burned when the church was bombed in 1941. And it's called A Brief Epitome of Spiritualism. Epitome means belief system. And we teach at our church, predominantly, if you saw our church, if you go on the website, look up Wimbledon Spiritualist Church, we've got a stained glass window, we've got a cross on the wall, and there's the sayings of the gifts of the Spirit round the window lintels. But we are a spiritualist church which lets you think for yourself. We will not ram any ism down into your mind. We will not tell you you have to believe this or get out. Because like this wonderful community here, you have to have freedom of thought, freedom of mind. You have to find your path and your journey. And one thing I've been trying to educate people with at church at home is don't judge somebody until you've walked in their shoes, because you don't know their life journey. You don't know where they've come from to get where they are now. You don't know where they've travelled, how much pain they've had, or hurt, or upset, or joy. And two of our colleagues at church last week had a humdinger of an argument just before service. And I looked at my Jackie, and being a wonderful, brave, wonderful husband, I said, can you go and sort that out? I'm not getting involved in these two people. And they were both heartbroken with each other. And it came down to lack of communication. Not spirit communication, earthly communication. And we have to understand that we are now, all of us, seeing our spirit in a body. And our consciousness, the soul, is there attached with it. And we are part of that Godhead. We are part of that divine. Whichever phrase you want to be, I quite like saying Supreme Being. I quite like the phrase Force, the divinity, the divine, Father, Mother, God. It's what it means to you in your heart and in your soul is how you do that. I've got some of these leaflets if anybody wants one. And we talk about our spiritualism being a science, philosophy and religion of spiritualism, and we're based upon the proven facts ascertaining through what we call the exercise of mediumship and scientific research. Now, people often say to me, how can you research if there's a life after death? Well, recently in, I think, Germany, they've actually found something, a particle which proves there is a continuing life. There is an essence that continues after we pass. And that was on Facebook and all the other types of things. The way we prove life after death, hopefully, is through the mediumship, where we give you evidence or proof of that person we're talking about. How we can give you that closeness, that we're not reading minds, but we're actually giving that evidence. I have a communicator here, he, she is saying X, Y, Z. And that's how we prove that in a scientific way. There are mediums in England and Scotland that have gone through scientific tests, they're wired up, and they prove that their voice they're using when they're doing spiritual work is not the same voice box they're using when we're talking like I'm talking now. The continuity of human personality after death is such a wonderful thing. My own father, not long after he passed, said, I've never felt so fit and well in all my life. And he shows himself in a garden back home where he's relaxing. Sometimes he's got a very large glass of brandy in his hand. So he's still communicating with that brandy and that spirit. And he shows himself quite frequently. He was here the other night when we were working. My mother-in-law passed away about 8 weeks ago. And she had that terrible condition, Alzheimer's, stroke, dementia. And the first thing she said to a medium, or medium said to me, he said, well, Ray, I know your mother-in-law's passed, he said, but she's put her hand in her pocket, she's got a packet of cigarettes in one pocket, packet of cigarettes and lighter in another, and she's saying, I've been waiting for years to have this, and she's lit up a cigarette. Now, the interesting thing I want to talk to you about spirit communication, we have a wonderful 2.5-year-old grandson. And we finally got the message, my son and I, we were out in the Surrey Hills. Jackie had taken a lady to Lourdes who had it on a bucket list because she's only got a matter of weeks to live. And we had my grandson in the back of the car, and on the journey he woke up going back to the hospital to go and pick my father-in-law up, vice versa, and he suddenly went, Daddy, where are we going? And Ashley went, Ethan, we're going to go and see Nanny June. He went, no, no. So we said, why? She said, she's gone. She's on the grass smoking. Or not smoking, he went like that. And he's only 2.5, and nobody smokes really around. His other granddad smokes. But he did that. So we got to the hospital, and he again went, no, she's gone. I've rushed up to the stairs, the lift, the elevator, with my father-in-law. We literally walked into the room, my mother-in-law took her last breath and went. And Ashley was trying to get into a lift, but there was a problem with the lift. He couldn't get into the elevator, couldn't get in there. And I texted him to say, Nanny's passed away. And Ethan looked at him and said, Nanny's gone. Grass. And Ashley sort of looked, and there's no grass there, but there's a little bit of grass at the front of the hospital. And when we went a couple of days later to clear her room out because she was in a home, he wouldn't go into the room. She's gone. Nanny June has gone. And we went in there, and obviously her bed's empty. He said, see, gone. And I said to Ashley, you know, we're spiritualists, and he's teaching us a lesson here. And he got adamant that she had gone, and we lived with that. And he didn't attend the funeral service, but he came to the reception afterwards. But the funny thing, sidestep from that, funny thing he said to me the other day, I said to him, oh, Nanny Mary, which is one of his other great-grandmas, I said, she's got a pussy cat. He went, no, she's gone. So I told my daughter-in-law, "Sure, I better phone quick because he's so right with this gone." And he phoned his nan. She said, "No, she's fine. The cat's fine. Sheba, she's fine." But when she sees Ethan, she goes, she runs because she doesn't want to be played with. So that's the gone bit. So communication again, get the right bit. Now in my ministry as a medium, and we're all ministers, perhaps not ordained by an organisation or a church or society, but we're all missioners in this world, bringing forward our message. It may not be the spiritualist message, it may not be this message or that organisation, but it's your message. It's your interpretation of life and death. We need to be evangelists in a way, bringing forth that message, bringing forth that substance of continuing life. I don't use the word death if I can help it. Sometimes I do if I'm in a community of people, that's the only word they really understand, because death really means finality, gone, over and done with, no more. But continuing life, from this life to a more abundant life, is a continuing life. It's a beautiful life. And my ministry has taken me into some strange places, into some wonderful places, and interesting situations. Conducted a funeral about 10 or 15 years ago at Wimbledon Church, and it was a very cold day, colder than what it is today. And the coffin here, and I'm standing sort of there, and it's a wicker coffin. Now, because the church, it's a winter's day, I've put the heating on. Well, I didn't know that the heat made the wicker expand. So I'm talking like I'm talking now about life after death, and the lady who'd passed on, Kathy, had passionately been a spiritualist all her life since a very early age. And I'm talking about, and I said, and Kathy will come back. The coffin moved. I've never seen so many people go, "Ooh." And the lid lifted a smidge, but it lifted. And they're all looking at me, and I'm thinking, hello, maybe Kathy is going to come back. And I found out afterwards, heat, cold, science, physics, wicker, it contracts, it goes hot, cold, and that's how it works. Kathy has come back since. She has given messages to her daughter and other relatives, and she's continued that belief from the spirit side of life that there is a continuing life. I'm also gifted as a spiritual healer. Now, spiritual healing in the UK is something like this. You sit in front of the patient, talk to them and ask them, you put your hands on the shoulders, on the head. As a man, I'd never go to the front of a lady, and a woman would not go in the front of a man. And sometimes you go touch the legs or knees, but you have to be very careful with clothing, which is right. Now, I'm doing healing in my church. I'm standing in for somebody, and this lady comes in her late 60s, early 70s, and I say to her, "Can I ask what your problem is?" And she said, "I have bad problems with my feet, terrible problems with my feet." So I said, "Okay." I said, "Well, I probably won't need to touch your feet, but this is what I do." But she said, no, you've got to get down on your knees, and you've got to give healing to my, it's what I need. So I said, no, you don't need to do it anyway. I'm getting down there. I'm on my knees or my posterior, and she then takes her shoes off and puts her feet right under my nose. She has, the problem with her feet is odour, and it was pungent. And I sort of had to go, oh. And she's got her feet, and it's there, it's like this. Holy Mary, Mother of God, please. Suddenly became Catholic in that moment. And my colleague who was standing behind was looking, and he could see what's going on and go, sort of thing. I couldn't get the odour off my hands. I had to stop healing for the rest of the afternoon. I had scrubbed with soap, I used a bit of disinfectant, it just was awful. And people said to me afterwards, "Oh, you should have told her off." I said, "No, it made her feel better that I went to that part of the body. I just thank the Lord she'd never had anything more personal wrong, and she wouldn't really put my hands. Because I literally would have gone outside and said, "Mum, come and save me." In my ministry, I know Jackie's the same, we look upon it as service to mankind. We look upon it as working for the people. And that's important how we uniquely do that in our own way, how we promote that message, how we talk about that message. Now, I was talking to one of the psychics in the city last night, Jodie, and I remember as a youngster watching a program filmed, I think, on the California coast. And this man said he channeled spirits from the dolphins. And the thing I found strange, and I'm not talking about the message he gave, but he suddenly had to put himself like a dolphin. His hands become his flippers, and his feet become the back tail, and he's squeaking like a dolphin. Now, I'm not saying that's wrong, right, but it confused me, because the message he had to offer was quite wonderful. He spoke about how these aliens had come to this country, not the country, but the world, had nowhere to live, so they ended up becoming dolphin-like and taking over the bodies of a dolphin, something like that, and their spirits lived within there, and they could communicate through this medium. Now, I'm not doubting that, but he could have just kept it simple by saying, I've got messages from people from originally out of this world that are now living in this world, and the message is this. And people would have found it. The TV made such a mockery of this medium. So again, you've got to keep it clear but simple. We have a saying back home in England, don't feed the medium. So if I come to you and say to you, do you have a mum in spirit and her name's Mary, I'm making this up, and you say, yes, it's my mum in spirit, her name is Mary, I could then say, well, her name's Mary, and the person sits there and goes, oh, that's wonderful, he's got my name. So in a nice, indirect way, they fed the medium. This is how we work in England. I'm not saying it should be like that everywhere around the world. We just like you to say a simple yes or no, because that makes it easier for us to give a continuing message from your loved one. But you also get situations where I've known women who've come into our church and said, I'm pregnant. So I said, okay, fine. And it's not the usual way, so I think, okay, fine. And they've been famous people that are in the spirit world now and supposedly come down, impregnated them and making them have a baby. And part of this people's problem is that the scans are showing they're not pregnant. And you have to then balance up, they probably are in communication with somebody. But the message, again, is being complicated because they have received it. Now, I'm not to say that spirits don't come and visit. I'm a great believer, and I know Jackie has done this in her classes, of trying to teach people to cross that bridge, the rainbow bridge, as I like to call it, where we on the earth can meet our loved ones on this bridge and chat and talk and give comfort. Even seeing a picture of your mum, your dad, your brother, your sister is a comforting thing. The Church of England have a saying in their prayer book, which I'm guessing is probably very similar in the Episcopal Church here, that the promise of a resurrection, a hope of a sure resurrection. Now, I've always said there's a definite resurrection. There's definite life going on to a more abundant life. That's not to say if they've been a bad person they won't get judged and punished. That's not to say they're going to go down to the fires of hell. Because really and truly think about it, if you think about the world we're living in at the moment, if there's somewhere worse than that, it is a bad place. But I do think some teachers have told me that people lock themselves into their own personal hell when they go over because they know they've done wrong. And then loved ones come forward, guides, angels, and try and bring them out of that negativity, darkness, whatever word you want to use. One of my spirit teachers is a guy called Thomas, and he lived around the Tudor times. And on earth, he would have been a Roman Catholic of that generation. And a priest administered the last rites to him. And he remembers, though he wasn't fully conscious, but I remember him saying to us, the priest said that you are now going straight to heaven. And in his own mind, he said, no, I'm not. I'm going to that other place, purgatory, because I've been such a bad person. No priest can absolve me truly of what I've done on this earth. He'd been a soldier and other things. And he put himself into a small dark cell. And for want of a word, lived in this dark cell. But the door was always open with a crack of light coming through. And two people he helped put it into the spirit came through one day and said, come on, there's a way of spiritual progression. You've got to learn. And over a period of time, he learned. And he's a worker with myself at this moment of time. And I know I do have a past life with him back in the Tudor times. But that's something I don't talk about, go on about, because I want to live for now. If I meant to have a lesson from a previous life, I ask my guys to give me that past life. But I worry about living for now. Because so many people worry about their past life. Were they an important person? Not what necessarily the life lesson taught them. Back home, Ivan used to do regression classes and people would come in and I'm hoping I'm going to find out I'm royalty, or I'm going to find out this, or I'm going to find out I was an important politician. And they're so disappointed when they find they were a stable hand, or they were a road sweeper or something. It's also, the important message was how they lived that life. A lot of spiritualists in England will say spiritualism and reincarnation have no partnership. Well, I'm of the opinion it does. It's not part of the spiritualist tenets, belief system, but I do believe we can learn from our past, from the Akashic records. Sometimes we get a glimpse of something we now could perhaps put right, where we put terribly wrong or made errors in the past. My spiritualism is one where my family come to church, we sit, we talk, we laugh, and have some fun. But it's also very serious. I don't like people when I think they're taking the mickey out of us, that are workers for spirit, and I won't book them, employ them. They have their life journey, but not necessarily going to expose that life journey into my church. And that sounds very, very dictatorial, but I do class myself as a very benign dictator. But you have to have a discipline with your mediumship, with your spiritualism or your spiritual path, that you keep to it. Because our life's journey is so unique and wonderful, and we can share with that. Now, back home in England, especially in London where we live, we use a lot of public transport. If any of you have ever travelled to London, best way, don't drive, use public transport. And if you do come to England between now and whenever, call us at Wimbledon Church, I'll take you around and show you bits and pieces that I can. But the more important thing is I share my message where I can. I see somebody who perhaps needs a healing thought, I try to send that healing thought. If I see somebody looks lost or troubled, I try to help. I try to be one of God's helpers on this earth. I try. Because some days I wake up and I'm having a bad day and I haven't even got out of the bed. I've been shoved on the bus, shoved on the train, screamed at by somebody else that's driving or whatever. And I just go, oh, bless you. Go forward in light. There are biblical terms in the New Testament, or the Old Testament you can use, but I try not to. Because again, it's trying not to judge, because you don't know what started their day off. And we all have our part to play. Now, with spiritualism, it gives you an insight to somebody else. You can perhaps see their light. You may see their spirit friends with them. you may see something with them that draws you to them or share with them. I often go to a park and sit on the bench and watch the squirrels and feed the ducks and things like that, and someone comes sits next to me, and recently someone was crying, and I turned over and said, "You okay? Do you need a hanky or something? Tissue?" And she said, "No, I've just had a bereavement in the family and I'm saddened by it." And I end up talking about life after death. And I try to use words perhaps where they're from. I haven't yet been called a witch, but I've been called a few other things. But I also take the opportunity perhaps not to talk to them, but tell them to go and visit their local spiritualist church or spiritual community centre, to find out more about that life after death, to find out more about that continuing life. I've recently lost two friends to the spirit world, both one in their very late 80s, one in their very early 90s. And they were very prominent in my life between the 1980s and the 1990s here on this earth plane, and they taught me and educated me a lot to do with spiritual things, but also a lot of earthly things. And I spoke at the funeral of one just the day before we flew over here. And I spoke of her vitality of life and spirit, how she would give readings one-to-one, she'd conduct services, she'd give messages, she would talk to people. She often felt the dog drew people to her in the street so she could talk to people through that. And Iris had a great passion for her Christian spiritualism. Very much Christ was a great part of that. And funny, that picture is a great part of her life. Not funny, ha-ha, but funny. And I miss them both already, but I know they're also in a far better place. I don't begrudge them going to the Spirit. I'm saddened by it. But that's life, because they were old, they were infirm, they were in pain, and life continues. My own father, as I said, he passed to the Spirit. He communicates with me. A few months ago, somebody said to me, if I'm a benign dictator, my dad was a nasty dictator in some respects at church, and somebody said to me, "Oh, your dad still feels he's in charge in the church." And I've gone into the church like you do here, switched all the lights, microphones off, gone in, and 30 seconds later I turned around, every light is on, the speakers are on, the electrics are all working, the heating temperature has gone up. And this medium who was sitting there telling me this freehand about my dad, he said, "Dad's just letting you know he's still in charge." I said, I'm good mind to go and leave everything on just to annoy him. And then the lights did go off. I had to switch the heating. But Dad always used to say, when I go to the Spirit, I'm going to go on a poltergeist course, rattle chains. And people in the circles at the church do that. Now, I just want you all to take your spiritualism or your spiritual journey, whichever word you use, live it, use it, become an instrument of God's peace on this earth, and bring healing to the nations. Thank you, friends. Let us give thanks for the time of sharing and being at one with our Creator. May the light that we have within us take us forward, protecting, helping us to open our hearts and our souls to all that is great in this universe of ours. For there is a peace of God that passes all understanding, keeps our hearts and minds in the knowledge and love of the teachings of the Spirit. And with that blessing and teachings, we depart in peace. So mote it be. Amen.